So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Amanda Wolford. I'm a consultant in talent strategy in the Office of Human Resources, and I will be your facilitator today. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Emily Tichich, who's an instructional designer, who will be helping me with the chat, and Marissa Nior, who will speak to some focus group work that she did as part of her role as a student employment specialist in talent acquisition. And then later, you are going to hear from a panel of student supervisor experts. We have Alona McCreary from the Office of Information Technology. We have Chen-Yu Guo from the College of Biological Sciences Student Services. And we have Tina Severson from Student Unions and Activities. I want to welcome our panelists. And again, you'll hear from them shortly. So now I'm going to jump into what you can expect to hear about during the webinar today. We're going to talk about what sets supervising students apart from supervising other types of employees. And you'll hear from Marissa and her experience with some focus groups that she did. And then we'll talk to our panelists about their experiences and how they're addressing challenges. And then finally, we'll share some resources that you can use to manage student employees. So first of all, there are some fun facts that you should know about student supervising here at the university. Supervisors of students make up a huge number of supervisors here at the U of M. In fact, over 2,000, or about 1/3 of all supervisors, manage at least one undergraduate student. And while it's most likely that you supervise between maybe 1 to 3 students, if you're a supervisor of undergraduates, it's not uncommon to manage very large teams of students, up to 20 to 80 students at a time. And so some of you were sharing that in the chat. And it's important to be aware of this because not only are student employees one of the biggest populations of our workforce, we're talking 10,000 student jobs. The population will continue to grow because of MPACT 2025 and its goal to increase on-campus employment opportunities. On top of all that, students are the reason that we're here and exist in the first place as a university, and ultimately their employment and experience with you as their supervisor is an important part of their college experience. And no pressure, but it might affect their academic success, their retention, their graduation, and future career choices. So being reminded of these unique characteristics can help inform the actions that you can take as their supervisor. So I'd like to call on Marissa Nior, who will introduce herself, and we'll talk more about what makes supervising students unique. Marissa.
Thanks, Amanda. Hello, everyone. As mentioned earlier, my name is Marissa Nior. I'm a student employment specialist on the talent acquisition team. In partnership with the Office of Measurement Services and the Office of Student Affairs, I supported the implementation of focus groups with student employees and student supervisors across campus to gain more insights about their experience and to gather information about how we can improve student employment systems in the future. During these focus groups, we learned from supervisors that student employees usually require more support and training than staff. And this is typically because for many students, this may be their first job, so they have no frame of reference for workplace expectations and communication norms. We also found that supervisors frequently have about 10+ student employees, making it very difficult to employ regular check-ins or similar best practice strategies that frequently are recommended for managing staff.
Great, thanks so much for sharing that, Marissa. And again, we're super glad to have you here today, and we're looking forward to hearing more throughout the next couple of slides. All right, so we're all here today because there's something a little different that sets supervising students apart from supervising a full-time employee. So what exactly makes supervising students unique? So on this next slide, one of the things that we do know about students, and many of you were mentioning this, is that their lives are very full of different commitments, their studies, their work, their family commitments, sports, social commitments, and many other possible commitments that they have. So on the slide, we have a chart that's showing a snapshot of an average student's profile for how they spend their time. It's clear that there's a lot going on in their lives, and work, to someone's point in chat, is only one of these many things and not always their first priority. And you can see that in the blue on the left middle side of that circle at 15.7%. So on average, about 16% of a student's waking hours is spent at work or on work-related activities. And this impacts the unique characteristics that they bring to their job with you and in which they interact with you and your team. It's especially important to note how much less time students spend on work than full-time employees. Keep in mind that though we have complex lives, full-time employees on average spend almost half of their time on work and work-related activities. So while work is an important part of an undergrad's student life, they will not be immersed in it as frequently as a full-time employee. So Marissa, could you speak to some more about the challenges that students might experience as they navigate their priorities?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned in the previous slide, students face a variety of challenges, often trying to find balance between their academic coursework, extracurricular activities, social relationships, and personal time for self-care. And so as students begin to prepare for their careers, they also find themselves navigating challenges such as finding and accessing resources, the pressure to get the right internship or the right job at the right time, imposter syndrome, lacking time or the social network, competition for desired internships or jobs, as well as food and housing insecurity.
Thank you, Marissa. That's a lot of challenges, and probably the most important factor that makes students unique is that they are typically in a phase of intense development and some of the things that you just mentioned. So students are exploring their academic interests, they're developing their social identity, creating new personal relationships, and of course, developing independence, and maybe for the first time in their lives. So while there's an exciting side to all this development, it also raises a lot of questions for them and can cause immense insecurity as they try to figure out who they are and how they fit into the world. As their supervisor, you can have an important impact on that during the approximately 16% of their time that they spend in their work role. So anything they do, anything they learn on the job will impact their development in some way. Students, as you mentioned in the chat, many times they are new to professional life, and that all comes with pros and cons. So on one hand, they may not have as much professional experience, but they often make up for this in their willingness to learn their role and enthusiasm for new projects. One supervisor we talked to pointed out that students come to their position without any prior skepticism. They're not cynical or jaded, they're willing to try new things, and they typically don't fall back on this is the way we've always done it trap. So doesn't that sound like a quality that anyone would want in a team member? And Marissa, what are you hearing about students' perspectives on what they're looking to get out of their student jobs?
Yes, so we found that students are often interested in professional development opportunities, and they see student employment as a stepping stone to their long-term career goals. And because of this, students want to increase their ability to properly communicate and transfer their skills so they can gain both, transfer skills they gain both as students and as an employee. Students see on-campus employment as an opportunity to learn more about workplace expectations in a professional environment and develop their skills, which include things like time management, networking, communication skills, leadership, problem solving and critical thinking skills, as well as conflict management. Many students also express that they greatly benefit from supervisors that are willing to go above and beyond and care enough to incorporate their personal and academic interests in their work when possible. As supervisors, you are all in the best position to help students overcome these challenges and develop these skills. But we are aware that they do not go without their own challenges. Supervisors and students both want to find ways to make the work more meaningful, connecting the students' academic and development, as well as providing real life experiences where possible.
Yes, very true. All good things. So thanks again, Marissa, for sharing those things that you found out with those focus groups. So another characteristic that makes students unique is that their work with you will always be second to their first job. Someone mentioned that already. And their first job is being a student. Remember, on average, students spend about 16% of their time on work, but on average, they spend a larger share, about 22%, on academics. They're here for that reason, and their education commitment generally takes more time than their time at work. And one supervisor we spoke with explained this by saying that, quote, by the time students get to you, they're essentially working overtime, end quote. So something to keep in mind. As a supervisor of students, it's part of your job to support them as students and not just employees. And many of you were mentioning the balance and the flexibility, and because they're students first, there are often logistical challenges that students may encounter, trying to work around their class schedule and commitments. And despite their enthusiasm for the role, supervisors of students know that scheduling their hours requires a lot of flexibility. This, combined with the possibility of frequent turnover, can make supervising students a unique position to be in, since they may not fit neatly into a typical work schedule. So to help give us an idea about how to navigate the challenges of supervising students, we're going to bring in our panel of student supervisor experts, and they'll share their insights. Again, we have Alona McCreary, Chenyu Guo, and Tina Severson that you'll be hearing from. So to kick off our panel, and we want the panelists first to weigh in on the challenges and changes that they've experienced, especially over the last few years. And then what are some ways that you might have addressed those challenges and changes? So Chenyu, can we start with you?
For sure. This is Chenyu speaking. And to answer this question, I think the elephant in the room is that we just went through a pandemic that made huge disruption to not just society, but like the entire higher education and education industry in general. So for me, what I have seen is that, well, there are a couple of things. Like first, it's like students kind of see how things are no longer being done as the way before. We have a lot of staff who are on hybrid schedule. So there are times where students will feel like, if offices have expectation for students to be there in person, right? Like why is it there are standards that are different for maybe staff versus for student employees? The expectation maybe is different for staff and students before and after the pandemic. Another thing I think that I have seen a lot in my student, in their way of thinking, is money. The pandemic has caused a huge inflation, not just in the United States, but just all around the world. And we're seeing like a very high cost for both now tuition, housing, and food, which is increasing the stress for our students. Although the university has increased the minimum wage for student employees to $15 an hour, I think we have to point out that this increase is not in the same proportion as how prices have increased over the last few years too. So for instance, like when I was an undergraduate student, my which was only like 8-9 years ago, my rent would be like half of what the students would be paying right now. The amount of money I'm spending on food is about half of what students are paying right now, but the minimum wage for student employees has increased from maybe $10 to $15, right? So it's more like closer to a 50% increase. So for us, we've seen students who sometimes really actually enjoy the work here at CBS, but they have to take on additional hours or they have to take on another job just so they can pay for things. And that really hinder with like the students' sometimes like their availability and an ability to do their job. And I think for that, for the supervisor, part of it is understanding the changes of external environment and how we can deal with that and how to provide support system for students. I do regular checking with my students to make sure like they're not having too many stress and things on their plates. I balance out tasks that are given to them. And just trying to understand like where they're at in their life, because I think that's a huge factor at play when it comes to their performance here at CBS.
Right. Thank you so much. Meeting them where they are, really like that. And you mentioned check-ins. We'll talk about that more too later on, but all really good points. And yes, we've been through a pandemic and we're feeling the after effects of that too. Tina, anything to add to what Chenyu was saying?
I think maybe just to mention, I feel like there's more flexibility around health and wellness after the pandemic or because of the pandemic. just more awareness of the need to that, how we need to take care of ourselves and stay home when we're sick. I feel like that's translated to student work expectations as well.
Yes, great. Thanks for sharing. I noticed that there's some Q&A coming in. We're gonna hold off on Q&A until the end, and our panelists and hosts may answer them on the spot within Q&A. So we'll make sure that you're all in the know of the Q&A that affects the entire group. All right, we're gonna go ahead and move on. And another unique challenge when it comes to supervising students is onboarding. So it is true that student employees are on a shorter employment cycle, and compared to supervisors of full-time employees, student supervisors need to onboard and communicate expectations more frequently. So supervisors of students need to be doing that more frequently. One of our supervisors that we spoke to shared, quote, "I'm worried about who is here this semester. There are leave, study abroad, and tough semesters. Some students are just here for a year. How do I onboard my students when they don't stay in their positions for long?" So we're going to go back to our panelists again. And this time, I'm going to call on Alona. And Alona, will you get us started and share your approach to onboarding students?
Absolutely. So I work in the Office of Information Technology, and I supervise about 40 of the 80 students that we have working on our helplines. I've been in this position about 2 years, and I believe at this point I've onboarded about 90 students. So it's an art, not a science, but applying some scientific methods certainly helps. I have a lot of checklists and spreadsheets that walk me through all of the onboarding steps, and then where every candidate is during that onboarding, when the last time I checked in with them was, and what the part they're at in their training is. When it comes to expectations around attendance, leave of absence, studying abroad, we do have a limit. You can take 1 leave of absence during your time here. If you need to be away more than that, then we ask you to resign on good terms. So you're not still on our payroll, you're not still working for us, but we'd be happy to have you back. And just making sure that we are as clear as possible about what our expectations are, especially with changing environments, and that we communicate that to the students often and frequently, and we have the documentation somewhere they can reference whenever they need it. We've noticed that after the pandemic, one of the things that's changed is a lot of our students are now working remotely. And while we used to be able to count on the students working together and helping train each other and onboard each other because they were sitting right next to each other, that's become more of a struggle with everyone working remotely. People don't know each other as well. They're not sitting and talking as they're working a midnight shift on Friday night. And so we've noticed that we do need to change our onboarding strategies to try and help foster that sense of community and connection so they can learn from each other more.
All right, thank you. So thanks, Alona, for your insight on that. Those are some really great ideas. And I think you represent someone who has quite a large group of students that you are working with. So I know that other folks can relate to that. It can be overwhelming to think about every detail of onboarding. And so we've actually revised some of our content in our supervisory development course to accommodate the onboarding needs of student supervisors. So we're going to look at a framework on the next slide. And so this onboarding framework outlines 6 key elements in every onboarding plan, and they are communication, resources, compliance, culture, expectations, and relationships. And instead of a one-size-fits-all approach, you can tailor your plan to the new student employee based on the responsibilities of their role, their academic needs and interests. That one is really unique to student supervisors and can help with career readiness, which we'll talk about in a little bit later, their current familiarity with the university. And then, as we've said before, for some students, this role might be their first position in a professional workplace. So establishing those expectations, communication, and relationships is going to go a long way in making them feel welcome and successful. And we had a previous webinar in 2020 on supervising undergraduate students, and we went through some of these steps in more detail. So you may want to check out that replay of that webinar. And today we also wanted to emphasize one specific element, and that is communication in the context of onboarding. So a lot of times we assume that it's the manager communicating about goals, resources, expectations, key people to make sure that the students have what they need. And we for sure want to emphasize expectations around student communication. So don't make assumptions that a student is going to reach out to you. We want you to explicitly discuss their schedule and their availability. So students are expected to prioritize academics, as we've talked about. And this might be their first professional experience. So I know you're working hard on designing work schedules around students' classes and regular commitments that they have. And this is especially important if you're not on site and working in that hybrid environment, as Alona talked about. So questions like, when will they work? And remember to revisit this periodically because things change, especially in the first few weeks of a new semester. How will others know about their availability? What are the attendance expectations? How will they communicate any changes? With projects and status updates, who needs to know about the status and the completion of work? How will they know that? And how often are you expecting updates to occur? And then also time-sensitive questions. How and who they might need to contact. You will want to identify any backups that might be needed. And as Chen-Yu mentioned, with ongoing check-ins, these are a great mechanism to continue these kinds of conversations. And check-ins also provide a good opportunity to prepare students for the next steps in their careers. So with that, we have our next panel question. So I'm going to turn to Tina and ask Tina, what challenges do you see students facing regarding career readiness? And what are you doing to help prepare them for that next step?
Sure. So a lot of students lack work experience. They may not have had a job before, or they had a job where maybe they didn't have a good manager, so maybe they lacked a quality experience. Another challenge is a lot of students need internship experiences, and how do they get ready to apply and be successful in getting those internship experiences? What we do in student unions and Office of Student Affairs is we focus on soft skill development. We use some skills that we call the student development outcomes to guide that. Another common way to frame those skills would be like NACE competencies, which are things like focusing on responsibility, focusing on dealing with critical thinking and communication. So soft skills will be translatable to any job that they have in the future. So while I have a student working at a post office or a bowling alley, that's probably not what their goals are for college, but those jobs can help them develop skills that will help them get their internship, develop their resume, and help them speak to their skill set and realize the skills that they are developing. As a supervisor, having conversations with them about the soft skill development is very helpful, just helping them realize how they're growing, how they're changing, how they're developing. And also setting goals with students around their work can be very helpful to help them realize the skills that they're developing. Just being responsible, helping them set up a small goal about responsibility, about getting to work on time, about communicating properly, wearing their name tag and showing up in their uniform. Those are really basic skills that are very, very important for their success at future jobs.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more with that. That's the transferable skills. Those are super important. And Chen-Yu or Alona, any additional adds to that particular question?
One quick add I have is I also found like designing the job to be as close to as a full-time real job as possible is really helpful to prepare a student as well. So I manage 8 employees, so I have the time to do a semester like performance review with them. That is based on the university performance review, like the exact same models and everything. So that kind of helps them to get an idea of like what to expect when they actually have a real job and what to expect when they have a full-time position, and the performance review, how it impacts them and how they need to perform in order to meet those expectations and stuff like that. So
Yes, fantastic. Alona.
In IT, we're lucky because we're embedded in this giant IT environment, and many of our students would like to work in that environment. So I try to sit down with them, not often because there are many, but every so often, and say, where would you like to go next? And if they say, I'm interested in software development, I'm interested in management, then I use my network to just introduce them to somebody who does that work. And from then it's on them, and they can arrange a time to sit down and talk with that person about their career journey and about what it took to get there, and their steps along the way. So I help facilitate those connections, but a lot of it, the student has to go on from there.
Yes, good reminder about informational interviews. Can be very valuable. So we are going to shift gears and just not necessarily shift gears in the moment, but just give you a couple of other tips that the panelists did speak to, but just to hit it home. Oftentimes students, they are not connecting their role to those professional pursuits. So as you heard, you can help connect them to those professional endeavors that they have. For example, if the student's job includes greeting people as they come into the office or answering phones, you can point out to them that these communication skills are actually a critical part of many professional roles regarding the field that they're going to be in. It's important to highlight those career readiness competencies, such as responsibility, critical thinking, communication, teamwork, and resilience. So as Tina mentioned, those are student learning and development outcomes. And there's one resource that was shared in chat, but the Student Employment Office also has some information on that too. So whenever you can, just tie it back to academic programming. And to help prompt conversations about these types of skills, aside from what the panelists shared, things that you can also ask them would be, how do you see this job fitting in with your academics? What do you hope to learn that will help you in school? What do you hope to learn in class that you can apply here at work? What's something you'd like to learn that you could, would help you in your chosen profession? So some really good thought-provoking questions that you can certainly ask them. So another challenge then we are going to shift gears that we know supervisors are dealing with is giving feedback. And so I did see that in the chat earlier today. And a few supervisors shared the following quote, "Tough conversations are intimidating. So I'm lenient and may not be as timely with following up with a student if I'm noticing that they are routinely coming in late without calling." And quote, "Expectations feel really different from when I first started. I want to be more patient, and I'm also struggling to get my student on the same page with me," end quote. So back to our panel, we'd like to hear some of your ideas on how to give feedback to students. So Chen-Yu, do you want to get us started with how are you giving feedback to student employees?
Sure, yeah, this is Chen-Yu speaking. I think when it comes to feedback and expectation, clear communication is important, but what's more important is the culture and relationship behind it. To me, the culture and relationship you have with students, or the culture of that office that you have with students, is the foundation of everything of the work that you're building on. It requires a lot of work, but the way I see it is that when that culture is built right, a lot of things just resolve by itself. You don't actually have to put in the additional work anymore. One of the things that I found was really important to give feedbacks. Before give feedback, the first thing to do is to engage the students. This is a really important step because I do recognize that students are not full-time employees. This is not like their full-time investment, right? There are things that you have to lay out the ground for them to feel invested in the place at first. To me, one of the model that I use a lot is the dialogic teaching and learning from the Pedagogy of Oppressed, which is like a book that I heavily use in my master's program. So the concept essentially is that if the students, what they're teaching or what they're learning, they feel like it has nothing to do with them or their own goals in life, or sometimes even feel like it's something that's oppressing them, then they're not going to learn. They're not going to engage with that. rather you will feel the resistance that they have toward that. So the only way to deal with that is to actually involve them in that process and having like conversation, generally getting to know them, like what they want and where they want to go, not just in terms of like career, but also their own personal story, personal journey, and their personal development. So when you understand those, you are able to kind of build that relationship with the students, and you're able to give better feedback and sufficient expectation of like why this is important, but also like having them feel engaged at work with the work that they feel like it's actually benefiting them too, right? So one of the example is that here at CBS, we I do check in with students, and afterwards, sometimes I will ask them about like, reflecting on their self, like, what do you want to gain from here? What are some of the expectations you have for me? Because it's like, I made it very clear that this is a two-way street, and having this kind of like expectation later on give me a lot more leniency to basically give feedback when it's needed, whether it's positive or negative, and frame it in the right way to help them succeed, if that makes sense.
Yes, so much good stuff in there that you just said, and really tapping into motivation and values and creating that culture of feedback. So some really, really good thoughts there. Thank you. Alona or Tina, anything to add?
I think I would just say it's how important it is to engage the student when you're preparing to give feedback, rather than just reacting to something that you saw or your assumption of what's going on, is to ask them questions and get their side of the story or their perspective on the situation before you give the feedback. It just helps so much in them being engaged and being able to hear. And a lot of times you find out things that you didn't know when you were making that assumption. So I think it's really important to hear their side of things before you decide how to deal with the situation. And then also, I think even referring back to the slide that you showed, it's really important to address things immediately as possible. If you see something, say something or ask a question. It's so easy as a busy supervisor to let things slide, but the best thing you can do for your team is to address the little things immediately as early as possible, just so things they just tend to keep going downhill if you let it slide. And then back to the point that Chen, you made, it's developing a culture of positive communication and coaching, so that just feels normal for people to be hearing feedback. A more open communicating culture, it's always, you don't want to have it be a big deal. If you're like, let's have a conversation in the office, you want that to be like, okay, not like, oh, I'm so scared. So you want it to be a regular occurrence. Having conversations should be a regular occurrence, I think. And communication should be positive too. When you're seeing positive things, don't forget to mention those. That's very important.
Absolutely. And we had a chat comment, so thank you for adding that in there, stuff about, recognizing and complimenting the strengths whenever they're noticed, and to show the impact of those strengths is it's super important. So all the great things that you just talked about as well. So for the sake of time, I'll just move us along here, and just to reiterate some of those tips on giving feedback. So there's many ways that you can deliver feedback. And like Tina was saying, it's really important to check your biases before you give the feedback. What assumptions might you be making? We have a whole module in our supervisory development course on giving feedback. So definitely check that out. And as we've talked about, ongoing check-ins are super important to talk about progress and check in about work and school and anticipate problems before they arise. Chen, you talked about that. And any kind of non-urgent feedback, can typically wait till you have those check-ins. But if there's a need to give more pressing feedback, to Tina's point, do it as soon as possible. Be timely with that. Because, you know, if a student employee is giving incorrect information on the phone, it's important to let them know in the moment, because especially because they're not there all the time. And if you wait to give them that feedback, they may or may not remember exactly what they said or did at the time. So, and I know a lot of this is in a perfect world and there's not always these opportunities, but just these are the best practices that we are sharing today. So a really important point that is underlining all these best practices today is that student employees may bring a fear of failure to their role. So it's critical that you establish that psychological safety, have that culture of feedback, that positive reinforcement, and show them that they can make mistakes and that they can learn from them. And doing this reduces that black and white approach that some students bring to their positions, and it creates more learning moments for them to experience and then, of course, to be successful. And as we've mentioned many times before, students have a busy schedule and supervisors feel the need to be flexible, but this can also affect reliability. So another supervisor that we talked to said, quote, "Their students first, and there's often so much going on in their lives. Sometimes I can't meet with them for weeks. They can also struggle with attendance, but I'm trying to be flexible and support their mental health needs while also balancing the need for reliable coverage at the front desk," end quote. So returning back to our panel and getting into some of this balance work, how do you balance getting the work done with the need to support the students? So Tina, could you tell us a little bit more about how you achieve that balance?
I think really being really clear about expectations. You do want to be flexible, you do want to be supportive, but there needs to be, especially around attendance, really clear expectations on how to deal, like scheduling, like we talked about before, scheduling around their regular commitments so that work is not something they normally need to worry about. They know when it is. They can schedule things around that. But then when there is a conflict, having really clear expectations around how that's dealt with. So, and also not just having them be responsible for when that's reasonable for them to like reach out to their coworkers and to help cover that issue, to make sure the work is covered and not just, you know, just call in and not do anything, I guess. So keeping them responsible and being flexible at the same time. So it's kind of a give and take. Because we are also responsible for providing services, so we can't just have no one show up for work one day. So,
right, good. And I think you were hitting on that accountability piece as well. So flexibility and accountability in addition. So Alona or Chenyu, anything to add on that, achieving that balance?
Yeah, I agree with Tina that setting expectations and being clear is really the foundational piece for this. I tell my students that just when we go through the handbook, the goal is show up to work on time and do your work, or talk to me about it as soon as possible. So getting them to know that this is what they need to do to have this job. Here are the possible consequences if they can't do that. And that doesn't mean that there's some moral failing. Sometimes these things are hard to balance. I tell them their first priority is their mental and physical health, because if they're not prioritizing their mental and physical health, they're either working too hard and burning out, or they just start really detaching from work and they can't do it. So their first priority is mental and physical health. Their second priority is their schoolwork. But to have this job, you still need to fulfill those things. I also have gotten better as I've been a student supervisor about planning ahead. During the start of the semester, students are, I think, legally required to change their schedules at least 4 times, especially as you write out the shifts and then they have to change their schedule again. So we try to get some full-timers to support us in certain key aspects for those couple weeks until it settles. Attendance gets worse during finals. We tell students you will have to work during finals, and we know that attendance is going to be worse. So when can we be careful and be mindful about that? We try to, when we're asking for budget or asking from our students, we try to build in resilience. We say we love having student employees, they're really important. And also if this desk needs to be open every day, then not only do we need to schedule somebody, they need to have a backup, and then we need to have a worst case emergency available for them. So just knowing that students have these challenges and building robustness into the system rather than, well, we had somebody and they called out sick and now we're up a creek. So
Good expectation setting there. Thank you, Alona. Just to reiterate what has been shared, and I've said using regular ongoing check-ins is a really important way to provide feedback and support. And these check-ins, I mean, they don't need to be like super formal, always 30 minutes, but just as long as you're checking in, I think that's the most important piece of it. And you can provide feedback and it can support the coaching that you're trying to provide to the students and helping them to build that resilience. So research says the more support a student feels, the more challenge they can tolerate. So there's ways in which you, a supervisor, can provide support, recognizing those contributions and the impacts of those efforts. So again, we talked about recognizing strengths and complimenting and showing impact, supporting their well-being, as Alona was saying, let them know that you care and that their well-being is a priority, and make sure that their work is fitting in with the overall campus experience. Continue to be flexible and keep communication open. Make sure that they know it's okay and expected, that they prioritize school, and that it's okay to ask for flexibility, but also setting the expectation that, yes, we are scheduling you over finals week. So, for example, if a current schedule is not working for some reason, just having that open communication where you can figure it out, talk about it, get those backups. And don't forget that there's a lot of ways to provide support. It can come from you, but also your team, other student employees, other resources at the U of M. And as their supervisor, it is your responsibility to realize that you're not their only support on campus. So, just keep that in mind and keep your own boundaries in mind as well. There's many valuable resources that we have on campus, and we want to share those with you. And as we move into talking about these resources, we're going to have Marissa come back to talk to us about some of the themes and pain points that she's heard from her focus group interviews.
Thanks, Amanda. So some of the pain points, well, there are two really good quotes here. When students have issues, I don't know how to help them resolve their issues or where to direct them. Some things are not as easy to support the student with. And a second great quote that we had about pain points was, a lot of information was getting passed from the top to eventually getting to us. And by the time it gets to the students, it's too late, or they haven't had the chance to debrief on that information. So during the focus groups, many student supervisors express the challenges they face when students need additional support, often feeling ill-equipped to provide the necessary supports for unique challenges that come up while managing students. Many find that resources for employing students are scattered and hard to find, often relying on supervisors or local HR to create and adapt their own materials. Students may also have additional work rules that apply to them depending on international visas, work study awards, et cetera, that can make it a lot more complicated. So those are some of the pain points that we heard from supervisors during our focus groups.
Yeah, those are really important. And I think as a supervisor, you really need to know what's the next step, like where can you refer students if you're not able to provide for what they need in the moment. So before we share, we have some recommended resources for you from the Supervisory Development Program, but we want to turn it back to our panelists to share resources or practices that you have found success with. So Alona, do you want to go ahead and get us started on that?
Absolutely. So for me, a lot of it has been thinking iteratively, and when I come up with a problem, solving the problem in the moment, but then also thinking, when this comes up again, what did I need to know and where do I put that information so I can access it? So again, there's a lot of spreadsheets tracking student work and a lot of different ways to communicate to the students that have been helpful. Specific tools that we use are When to Work is the scheduling software that we use. And I think I've heard a couple other supervisors mention it. We are able to talk with our students on Slack and have Canvas trainings they can walk through. Other resources have been just the community of other student supervisors in my department, just being able to work with them and commiserate and share ideas. And then there are a couple of specific things, such as realizing that the email is not a very effective form of communication for many students. So if I have information they need to know, figuring out how I can follow up with them other than just sending them another email. There's an excellent resource called the Red Folder that I think it's at mentalhealth.umn.edu, but I will work with our excellent organizers and get that to everybody. That is a gorgeous informatic of just how you can help students who are especially in a mental health crisis, and where you can direct them and what the different resources are for helping them out in different areas.
Thanks, Lona, and thank you to my colleague who put the Red Folder information into the chat. How about Chenyu or Tina, any final thoughts on resources, maybe one or two resources that you find useful?
Sure. One of my student managers brought a chat app called GroupMe to our work group because it doesn't require a smartphone, so it's more. We had some international students who didn't have the same access as everyone else. So it provided more equal access to, and that student set that up, so I don't have a lot of the details, but I know it's easy to find. But that worked really well for that group because it was very much like texting, but it's not providing everyone all your private phone information. It's more, I don't know. I think they use it I think students use it in group work at the university. I think that's where they got the idea.
Great, thanks, Tina. And Chenyu, go ahead.
When it comes to practices, one of the things that we focus a lot here as CBS Student Services is community building. And we use GroupMe as well. We actually have two GroupMe. One is for work-related stuff only, and another thing actually includes past, we call them peer advisors, which are our student employees, but past peer advisors are included on the second GroupMe, which is for fun. And that is like the community GroupMe, and we host anywhere from 2 to 3 community building events every semester. And during the summer, we have like 1 or 2, where basically we have our student employees connect with each other, getting to know each other. The idea is really that when folks are seeing each other actually as human beings and not just as coworkers, they generally feel more invested in the work that they're doing and feel like they have to meet the expectation. So that is something that we do here that has been working pretty well since like we come back in person. So
great, thank you so much for sharing those ideas and resources. We are running out of time, so I'm just going to move us along and give you some information about some additional resources that we've compiled, a list of that you can check out, and you can go to the Z link at the top. Again, we'll send you a post email with all this great information, but we've highlighted some mental health support resources, which offers in-person mental health appointments, services, resources, and access to urgent care counselors for U of M students. The Disability Resource Center, or the DRC, works in partnership with students, faculty, staff, and guests to eliminate or minimize barriers and facilitate inclusion on campus. And we also have the Nutritious You Food Pantry, providing the fresh and healthy food to students who are struggling to get enough to eat. In addition, we mentioned some other resources in our supervisory development program. So the first resource is a quick guide to supervising undergraduate students. And then next we have our guide on onboarding undergraduate employees. And so that has been tailored to onboarding that audience specifically. And we have another quick guide to delegation, which covers steps that you can take to set a student up for success when you need them to take ownership of a task or project. And then finally, we want to point you to our newsletter that we recently did on managing generations at work, which is a hot topic these days. And it will give you some tips and perspective when it comes to understanding generations. I want to share another resource that we have that is a Google group. So it's a Supervising at the U Google group. So if you didn't get your questions answered, this is going to be a great way for you to crowdsource some advice or tips from other student supervisors, because sometimes you might feel like you're on an island because it is different than supervising full-time employees. So we really encourage you to join that group where you can go ahead and submit your questions, and then you can interact with folks like you've seen on this phone call today. So just a reminder that we have our supervising.umn.edu site that is available for pretty much the entire university community, and also anyone can access it. We do have different courses and things that do require registration, but overall, most of the resources that we talked about today are open and access. If you have additional questions, you can feel free to email us at ltd@umn.edu. We encourage you to join the Google group, and again, supervising.umn.edu for additional resources. So I want to thank you for your time today, for attending this webinar. Thank you to Marissa and our panelists, Tina, Chenyu, and Alona, for sharing all of your wonderful thoughts and expertise today. And we hope you find this information very useful and relevant to your supervisory experience. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.